Socrates said, "Know thyself." Yeah, who are we, and who are the people we interact with? I think it would have been easier in Socrates' day by far to know who we were and who others were compared to today. Why? Because I call ourselves now the not just bionic man or bionic woman or $6 million man. I call ourselves now the triune man, or even, shall we say, the blessed man, or the given man, as per the movie The Giver. Yeah, we hear the phrase too. Oh, I missed all the red flags, and so I got into a lot of hot water here, in a relationship or who knows what. Or we have the phrase too, I didn't know who I was dealing with, or they held back critical information. We also have the phrase, on the other hand, they were the real McCoy, as opposed to they're a fraud, or, they're just pulling a scam. Well, my opinion is, at present, there's no such thing in one sense as a fraud pulled upon somebody else, or a fraud as a person. There's, in one sense, no such thing as a scam. Why? Because from a certain point of view, an Eastern point of view, and maybe to some extent a Western point of view, everything is perfect already as it is, in one sense. That if everything is governed by the laws of the universe, well then there can be no errors, no room for talk then of things such as scam, fraud, and even, let's put out another term, a peroxide blonde, as opposed to, the real blonde, the real McCoy blonde, the non-fake. Yeah, in one sense, we don't like sometimes what we get, and we call it flawed. And on the other hand, if you look at the whole totality, you say, well, it couldn't have been any other way. So I think then to know who we are, and to know who others are also, kind of comparison and contrast, and put ourselves on a continuum, so to speak, because nobody is like on one end or the other. Nobody is a Renaissance man or woman. We have to look at the whole totality of a human being. Now, we once were just quote-unquote flesh and blood, so to speak, or as the phrase goes, a bag of bones, or a bag, as I might say, of words. In other words, our software. But now, we have this new idea here. Oh, the bionic man, or bionic woman, or $6 million man, Lee Majors, Lindsay Wagner, even my mother with a knee replacement. And my gosh, was she a happy camper after that than before. I remember talking to one time, way back, gosh, this must have been 40 years ago, to a gentleman with a PhD. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not. He had told me repeatedly that he had such pain in his knee that he'd like to cut the thing off to get rid of the knee pain. And that was before, knee replacements. Well, I suppose, too, when they first had a knee replacement, we could have had a joke or two that, periodic maintenance is required with an oil can, and, use this kind of oil and not that kind of oil, and careful on temperature parameters and so on and so forth. But still, we could call that then a form of $6 million manism. We're a bionic now, in a sense. And hence, who is the real McCoy human being, flesh and blood only, versus the peroxide blonde person now, in a sense, physically speaking. The same with cars, for that matter. Now we have so many electronic items in it, circuit boards, wires in general. We have so many integrated circuits and more, computers running everything in the car in part. Yeah, so we have now kind of, in a sense, bionic cars. I think, too, to the movie or documentary Buck, and reference to him being the real McCoy. Yeah, well, in a sense, on a continuum. Because is there anything really as the real McCoy except what you might call perfection in every area? And on the other hand, maybe we're already perfect as per who we are, dictated by the laws of the universe, whether this is an Eastern concept or a Western concept, even from Christianity, saying that, the Lord's will be done, and the Lord's will is being done as per the laws of the universe again. Now, looking at the little blurb on the, let's see, I got to look at my notes here. The Bionic Woman, Lindsay Wagner, the first female super being. Super being. The first peroxide blonde without application to the hair follicles, the hair. Yeah. Well, I want to talk of something beyond $6 million man. It'd be a lot more than $6 million for some upgrades now. Let's talk about the $600 million man. Or let's have a mind spinner here. Instead of just saying that we're now bionic, let's call ourselves trionic, or even moreover, blessed. We've been given. Yeah, by the giver. So here's what I mean then possibly by the trionic man or woman. I'm not sure exactly, but maybe, let's just say a couple hundred years ago. I was reading articles on this and watching videos years ago, 2, 3, 5 years ago, on the concept of anesthetics. And it's pretty mind-boggling, the changes that have happened over time. But if you think back to the Civil War, if you got shot or whatever, in the arm, leg, what have you, it could well have turned to gangrene, and you'd be sent, if you were lucky, maybe, or maybe not, to a field hospital. And here comes the surgeon with his saw. So the phrase came, well, you're going to have to bite the bullet, and here's, if you're lucky, a little alcohol to help bite the bottle, in a way, or bite the liquid also. Yeah, it was not very pleasant, was it? We have, too, the concept of opium, the Opium Wars, if I remember correctly, the phrase going. We have concepts of ether. But then what about 1954, I believe it was, when Thorazine was first approved, discovered by accident. I believe maybe it was a dye or something discovered at first, and then found to have very tranquilizing properties. Well, that might have been the start, in one sense, of what I might call the triune man or woman, or the given person, shall we say, if you were to look at the trailer and or movie for The Giver. Yeah, we always had, I don't know, let's just say approximately 200 years ago, roughly, more and more on the scene, the advent of, shall we say, substances to anesthetize us to some degree. So, we might say then that was perhaps what you could technically call the beginning of the triune person. Instead of the bionic man, the triune man. So, in a sense, the chemical era preceded the metal parts era, or circuit board era, or whatever you want to call going into Lee Majors as per the movie The $6 Million Man. Yeah, so we can rebuild him. Well, we've been doing that probably then 200 years ago, roughly speaking, with chemicals. They preceded this show, The $6 Million Man, perhaps, in that respect. Or you might call him then Lee Majors, or people starting 200 years ago, roughly on and now to now, the peroxide blonde person. Yeah, the peroxide blonde era. And I would just have to say there are pluses and minuses. And you know, Aldous Huxley, too, had talked of some things with technology and more. He used a nice little word, soma, S-O-M-A. Maybe in a sense then, since 200 years ago, roughly speaking, we are now the soma man and woman, or it is the soma era. There's a lot of phraseologies then to look at here, but let's get, into the general concepts for a minute or two. Yeah, and as per practical applications too in real life, it would be very nice to know who we are and also who others are in all respects, especially what is coursing through the veins of people to make them sometimes appear one way, but maybe they're not exactly who we think they are. And how could we possibly ascertain this one way or another? Really? You think, for instance, to San Francisco. I'm not sure exactly when this started to happen, 1960s, and just roughly speaking, the gay bathhouses, HIV infections, and so on and so forth. And after a point in time then, it was very discouraged, of course, gay sex due to AIDS, HIV, etc. And you really didn't know then who you were talking to or dealing with in that scenario, unless you were to flat out say, well, I'd like you to have a blood test, please, to figure out, just where you stand, and then repeatedly, well, that can be very cumbersome if you're of that, way of life, orientation, what have you. No moral comment, no nothing about that, and, I am not gay. But I have no comment about that one way or another, but you didn't know after a point in time then who you were dealing with. Were you dealing with a man or a, peroxide blonde man in that respect of not knowing what's coursing through, in terms of a virus? I mean, likewise, unless you were to somehow ascertain, you don't know whether someone has been to prison or not, and for what reasons, by the way. No comment per se then on who has been to prison or not. You don't know, too, who once was in rehab or not, or whether they struggled with alcohol or not in particular. And, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world compared to some other things in my estimation. But unless you, quote, check them out and thoroughly, how would you know? And how could you even, check them out? Let's say, you were wanting to date someone. If you said before the first date, oh, by the way, I'd like you to go have a drug test, and I also want to have a complete dossier on you by the FBI on all possible criminal activities and this and that, and any rehab activities. By the way, is there a registrar for all the people who've been to rehab or not? I don't know. And, by the way, no comment one way or the other about rehab and those who have gone or not. Too, Boris Yeltsin, once president of Russia, it was said in videos that he concealed certain information about his family, father or grandfather, and that if he had been truthful about it, they would have never let him go to the heights he had gone. He would have never basically gained admission in certain respects. So he was, in a sense, too, a peroxide blonde in one respect there, his past history family-wise. It was a little humorous, too. A couple years ago, there was this gentleman who had met me, and we got talking, and he said, he said that I must be smoking marijuana. I was, calmer than average, happier than average, let's just say. And he said, yeah, you must be smoking marijuana. And I just smiled, and he said, yeah, you're smoking marijuana. Well, yeah, the perception was then one way or another. Who is the peroxide blonde and who's the real McCoy in terms of, really, what do you see? Is what you see what you get? Yes, for instance, musicians may use beta blockers sometimes to be more calm before and during a concert. It has a calming effect. Well, yeah, you could like swig a little bit of alcohol too beforehand. That might make your music a different genre of music. I've heard it said too that beta blockers might be useful before a job interview. So then how does the interview know who they're talking to? Are they going to like pull out a little kit here or a device that you breathe into, a breathalyzer? What do they call those things? And no, let's have a chemicalizer as to what's floating through our chemical stream, not just through our breath as per alcohol. Yeah. Do you have a breathalyzer for beta blockers? Do you have a breathalyzer for tranquilizers? Well, I don't know that there's such a thing. Maybe we need to invent one. Then we could pull it out before a possible date and say, honey or guy, you want to take a little breathalyzer test here to see what's in your bloodstream? I don't think that'd go over so well. Yeah, when Socrates said, know thyself, it would have been better nowadays if we could say, it's far better to know others, because we already pretty much know ourselves to some extent, albeit maybe the labeling is confusing us. What labels can we use or not? What terminology? Now that's a biggie in knowing ourselves. But still, know thyself pales in comparison to knowing other people nowadays, because of the bionic effect, bionic man, bionic woman, and $6 million man. And, I would have to say the chemical man. We really don't know who we are anymore as per who we're talking to. Socrates said, know thyself. We can't possibly know who others are. That's not the biggest issue, perhaps, knowing ourselves. I was reading, too, 10 years ago, in Romania once, you had to get a license before you could buy a television set. And a couple of years ago, I was listening to a conversation someone was having on a phone. They wanted to adopt a dog, and the person who had the dog was really questioning. Can you support this dog in an adequate manner, basically, like the person was, trying to adopt a human being, an infant. Question after question after question. Do we get to do that with regard to people before we go any further than a little chit-chat, before it develops into something? And not just questioning of that nature, but do we get to administer a drug test or request one? Or pull out a breathalyzer and have it give a complete readout of everything under the sun? I don't think so. We'd find it kind of offensive. In fact, I'm not gay, but I was looking the other day online just to look, on YouTube, for instance, and I was looking. How, if you were gay, would you request from someone else you might want to have a, interesting time with? How would you request a blood test be done first? I could not find anything. All I found was, make sure they use, safe sex measures. Oh, yeah, that doesn't always work. There was no mention of how do you politely request someone have a blood test. Yeah, nothing. Zero. Nada. And again, I'm not gay. And there's no moral comment here one way or the other. In a sense, everything has pluses and minuses when you get down to it. Or otherwise, you would never go to the pharmacy. They call it, benefits and side effects, really. So, in Socrates' days, we were just flesh and blood. Now, we're flesh and blood. We're wires, we're circuit boards, we're metal parts, we're plastic. Yeah, we're bionic, we're $6 million man material, now $600 million man by the time you pay the bills. And we're now the triune man or woman, or the given woman and man. We've been given a blessing of all these chemicals, plus and minus. You have to just wonder then, in a sense, The title of the book, Civilized to Death. And it's somewhat, well, interesting gentleman who wrote it, if you will watch some videos on that. Discussion of the book by the man who wrote the book. Yes, civilized to death. Or, you might just say civilized in a new direction. Or say, we certainly aren't the caveman anymore, of flesh and blood only. Yeah, we have a larger brain size. We have more cultural addendums, if you will. And we got a lot more plastic, metal, wiring, and chemicals. What do we call that in one sense? The peroxide blonde. Yeah, we are now in the peroxide blonde era. Or we're now in the peroxide era. Or maybe even the Rogaine era. Who's got the real hair and who doesn't? And whatever other chemicals there are now to possibly promote hair gain. Hair gain. Hair growth. Oh, and we can't forget, too, matters of, what do they call it? Plastic surgery, breast augmentation, liposuction. Oh, and diet pills. Yes. So who is taking diet pills, by the way, and who isn't? Very good question. Maybe we ought to just call ourselves the Renaissance man and woman. Wouldn't that be simpler? Wouldn't that be more pleasant? Yeah, we're just now the Renaissance man and woman. We've been renaissanced. Well, those are some thoughts I have then on the whole bailiwick. And you know what? I would just say there's no moral comment here, and there's no imperfection either if you figure it's by the laws of the universe that everything has happened. Yeah, well, you know what? The laws of the universe might say in about 13 billion years, the entire universe is going to be sucked into a black hole, and there's going to be a lot of nothing. By the laws of the universe. Is that necessarily in everyone's best interest, or is it just is? I have no, special acumen, so to speak, in physics or astrophysics or whatnot. I used to go to the Hubble Planetarium when I was a kid in North Carolina, and I took a 1 or 2 week program there, like a summer camp when I was 7 years old at the planetarium. And I have to this day in the next room here a little piece of meteorite on a little card from there. So yeah, I'm a little interested in all of that, but I'm not going to go around calling myself an astrophysicist and all that. But still, you just got to think here for a second. Isn't this all very fascinating? And, does that mean then we're all headed exactly in the best direction for humanity? Or that everything's going to be fixed if we go to Mars? Or who knows where after that? Let's go to Sagittarius? Well, I don't know. It is what it is. And there's no sense of imperfection then, or moral claims one way or the other, if you start to look at it. But still, in a sense of, surely there is brokenness and imperfection in another sense of what could be better optimized. But how things got this way or stay this way, well, that is a matter then of perhaps the laws of the universe, and then saying, well, in that sense, it's all perfect. That's my final comments here on all of that, somewhat aided perhaps by some time in the past 15, 20 years of a more Eastern perspective from Shambhala, and visiting some monasteries over my lifetime and more. That's my spiel then, my comments on, shall we just say, the peroxide way of life, the triune way of life, the given way of life. Take your words of choice, whatever the heck.